Hello and welcome to Face to Face. Our guest today, we're filming this in kind of late August. Our guest today is Saanich City Councillor Vic Derman. I heard Vic on CFAX radio about 2 weeks ago talking about Central Saanich and some of the issues there. And we're actually going to be talking about 3 issues today: Central Saanich, the Juan de Fuca Marine Trail, and then maybe a bit about the E&N at the very end. But you gave an explanation, Vic, of what was going on in Central Saanich that I found very interesting. There had been some criticism by the mayor of Central Saanich about the criticism of the CRD, and you sit on the CRD board as well. But you gave a very good explanation of what's really going on and what the issues are. So maybe you can tell us what is the issue?
Sure, Jack. I'd be delighted. Well, first of all, there's been the mayor who's expressed concerns, and there's been others who have expressed the fact that they see the CRD as meddling with municipal affairs and actions. And really, I don't think that's defensible to state that. What we have in our region is something called the Regional Growth Strategy. And it is actually an agreement between the municipalities, the 13-member municipalities, and it's administered on their behalf by the CRD. It's an attempt of the municipalities to get together under provincial legislation and say, how can we handle growth and development in the future to retain the best of this region and to make sure that we are sustainable as we move into the future, and that we don't wind up with some sort of unholy mess of inappropriate development and transportation issues, all sorts of things. So over a long process, give and take and so forth, compromise, and the 13 municipalities, each one of them signed off on what they would agree to. And they agreed that they would put some limitations on how they would develop and how they would change in the future and so forth. They have it in their official community plans, and then there's what's called a regional context statement that says how they will make sure that their official community plans are in agreement with the regional growth strategy and with what they have agreed to. Central Saanich, within, or any other municipality, within what they've agreed to, as long as they were within the confines of that agreement, they can do whatever they want. And I have no problem with it, and nor should I. But there was an issue in Central Saanich where they began to approve some developments that were at least questionable as to whether or not they fit into that agreement.
Now, I'm just going to cut in here, and I think the issue we are talking about is the co-op store.
Yeah, it's one of the issues, and perhaps the one that became the most critical in that respect. There was a development on Van Trite's lands. There were some other issues that people expressed concerns and said, should the Capital District, Regional District look into these things to see if there is an issue?
Because municipalities were kind of doing something that is outside of their own agreed plan.
Absolutely, or potentially outside, and the CRD is the administrator on behalf of the municipalities. So nothing was happening, and it turned out we had no established protocol for how the CRD would monitor it. So I brought forward a motion saying, look, we need to be looking into these issues. It's our responsibility as the administrator of this agreement. Staff agreed, the CRD, and they brought forward a protocol where an individual director could bring forward a motion saying we should look into these things and see if they're consistent or not, or if there's a problem, and the steps you would go through. So I brought forward a motion saying, yes, we need to look at these things. Some of the things that that Central Saanich was doing, in the end, it turned out that staff felt they were consistent with the agreement. Fine, fair enough. In the case of the co-op, staff said, no, it is not consistent with what you agreed to. It is outside of it. It requires a change in your regional context statement. That requires an amendment to the regional growth strategy. It's not an easy process, but probably it shouldn't be. So, that's the process that went on. Now, as I understand it, Central Saanich will be seeking an amendment. I think they should have been all along. They were going through the process of putting this through first reading, second reading, so forth, public hearing, and et cetera, without bringing it to the CRD. And so I guess I pushed the issue a little bit more than anybody else to say, you need to bring this forward for consideration of whether or not you are living up to your agreement We all expect when we get that kind of legal agreement that people will live up to it.
And what you said on CFAX was, we need a plan, because if there isn't a plan, what have you got?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are many, many examples around North America and elsewhere that if you just have fragmented development with one municipality doing this, another municipality doing that, it's like there was an editorial in the Times Colonist, and essentially they said, of course the CRD should look into this. If we don't have some sort of consistent regional plan for future sustainability, the alternative is chaos. And they're exactly right. You're going to have loss of green space, you're going to have huge transportation issues, and these things cost everybody. They cost us our quality of life. If you suddenly find that moving around the region, what used to take you 10 minutes to get to somewhere and now takes you 35 minutes, and you're frustrated and you're in traffic, your quality of life has gone downhill. Your region is less attractive for people to invest in, and it also costs each municipality when other municipalities do things that are outside the agreement. For example, let's say I was to decide to put a huge number of people in addition to what we have out in Sauk. Well, there would be a call to upgrade the highway, unquestionably. Unless you put 100,000 people out there, if you put, say, 15,000 new people, that's not nearly enough taxpayers to pay for the new highway. So the people of Saanich and Victoria and Esquimalt, Hope Bay and Colwood would be paying for that new highway. So the cost of much of the infrastructure is shared. And so you need that regional agreement to say, is this the way we want to go? Is this something that we feel we can support? Because it's going to be our future as well as yours.
Okay. Getting back to the Central Saanich thing, I think what was happening, and I'm not even sure, is that the co-op, and this is, what's the name of the co-op?
Well, the co-op is simply, it is a co-op. I think it's called Peninsula Co-op.
Yes.
And they have members all around the region, and nothing wrong with co-ops. They're a good idea. But they are subject to the laws of the development process, just like anybody else.
I think what they wanted to do was move their store and kind of move into agricultural reserve land area.
Yeah, well, the big issue, of course, was Central Saanich had signed off on the regional growth strategy and said, here are our areas where we will establish urban-style development in the future. And the proposal for the co-op, a very large grocery store, was outside of any of those three areas that they had indicated would be the areas where they would develop. And it was on land that was agricultural land. The problem for me, the huge, huge problem, it sets a precedent. If any municipality can sign off and then do whatever they want, why do you have an agreement? Because your agreement becomes useless. It essentially becomes a piece of paper, and we just can't afford to do that. So the whole issue for me was not an issue of whether or not Central Saanich is doing good development. It's simply saying, here's what a municipality has agreed to. It appears some of what they are doing may well be outside of their agreement. We cannot have a precedent of allowing municipalities to do whatever they want. That's a sure recipe for disastrous results in the future.
And again, this is an agreement that every municipality has made up for themselves, and they have said this is how we are going to develop in the future. And really, Central Saanich or any other municipality is just being held to the agreement which they have made themselves.
Absolutely. Within what you agree, if Central Saanich had decided they wanted to do certain things within what they had identified as their development areas, they would be free to do whatever they want. I might think, wow, this is a ridiculous agreement, but it would be nowhere, in no way whatsoever within any of my jurisdiction or right to say anything about it. It would be within what they had agreed to, within their powers. That's fine. Their own citizens could judge that. When it comes an issue of regional growth strategy, then it's the responsibility, in my view, of any CRD director, which I am at this time, to step in and say, wait a minute, we need to review that. We need to look and see if, in fact, that's consistent with what you said you were going to do.
So you're a city councillor in Saanich,
yep.
And Saanich has an official community plan?
We do. Yeah, every municipality does.
And then all the community plans together make up a regional growth strategy, or there's something?
Not quite. The regional growth strategy becomes a set of what are essentially called regional context statements. And that you decide what you're trying to accomplish in the regional growth strategy in broad principles, and of course it's protection of rural lands, protection of wild spaces, things of that nature, sustainable future transportation system. And then each municipality comes up with what they think they will do that will still allow those things to happen. And in the end, the whole group of municipalities have to vote to accept their context statement. So there's give and take, and there's negotiation back and forth. It's not an easy process, but it's a very important one. So over time, each municipality came up with something that was acceptable to the other municipalities. Central Saanich had, I think, a very remarkable OCP, very progressive, very far-seeing, and the whole thing then becomes an agreement of these 13 plans that the municipalities have submitted, and they have agreed with each other. That's how they'll work.
We're going to move on to another issue now, but similar, and that is what a lot of people perhaps call the Western Forest Products land, or what's going on along the Juan de Fuca Marine Trail. And that is some land was given back to Western Forest Products, and it's now being developed. This is out around the Port Renfrew area. And a lot of people, a very surprisingly large number of people, are quite up in arms about that issue. Maybe you can describe the issue and what's happening.
Sure. Those are what are identified in the regional growth strategy as the rural resource lands. Now, when the regional growth strategy was originally created, and for some time back in the planning processes at the CRD, very little planning took place for that area, because it was part of the forest land reserve that existed at the time, and it was also part of a tree farm license. Now, tree farm licenses were set up to allow private companies to have access to public forests. And of course, the province gets a royalty, but there was a quid pro quo. Because they got access to the public forests, they would have to roll in some of their own lands and things of that nature. When we did the planning for that area, we thought there was nothing to say that that status would change. Then the province eliminated the forest land reserve, but it was still part of tree farm license. And then I guess Minister Coleman at the time decided he would free the company from any obligations under that tree farm license, without any consultation with First Nations, to the best of my knowledge, without any consultation of local government or other people who had an interest in the future of that area. Really caught us by surprise. You know, I think it was an unfortunate decision. I think there should have been an obligation to say, okay, if we are going to let the company out of this agreement, what do we expect to capture back for the public?
Absolutely.
In terms of the public interest? That, unfortunately, didn't take place. It left us in a bit of a situation, and also all of a sudden there were these lands that the forest companies had that had always been part of an urban working forest rather, that were free and available for them to sell on the open market. And they put some parcels along the edge of the Juan de Fuca Marine Trail up for sale, and the developer, or would-be developer I guess, purchased them. And nothing wrong with him purchasing. That's what he does, and they had become available. So he eventually brought forward a proposal that he would put just under around 260 units, plus recreational and areas for staff and things like that, along the trail, stretched out over time.
And maybe you can just identify where exactly this is happening.
About somewhat sort of in between Port Renfrew and Jordan River.
Okay.
So pretty remote, you know, really way out from anywhere. Jordan River isn't a huge area, and neither is Port Renfrew.
And for those of you who don't know, this area is still within the CRD.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's the biggest part of the CRD geographically. Population-wise, there's almost nobody, or very few people there. So fundamentally, his plan would put in peak season probably somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people out in this area. More people than the combined populations of Port Renfrew, Jordan River, and Shirley, which are the 3 local communities. It is supposedly a guest services, but it be under a strata type of development where people have the right to stay there for 6 months, up to 6 months. Now, that can become almost residential in nature and is really pretty hard to police. So, in some respects, it could be seen almost as a residential development rather than just tourist. The plan we put together for the region, in something of a rush, admittedly, did have the opportunity for limited tourist development to support assets like the Marine Trail. I don't think anybody, in my view, was anticipating we would put anything of that scale out there. It's seen by some, and I might be included, I think, as another form of sprawl. You're certainly never going to have transit out there, so everybody's going to move in by car. Infrastructure is extremely expensive if you ever have to put it out there. Water supply is somewhat problematic. Fire is a huge issue. This is sitting in a forest, so there are forest interface hazard issues. It's way away from the local fire departments, and they're volunteer departments. So they have stated they have neither the equipment or the inclination to make this part of their concerns. So the last we saw was there was a plan to have a fire truck stationed there while it was being built, and after that it was up to the strata owners to provide for their own fire protection. That's really, really questionable. So there are a lot of issues. What it came down to for me is I see this again as something that is quite possibly contrary to the regional growth strategy. I don't think a regional growth strategy anticipates putting 500 to 1,000 people out in the middle of nowhere. So I again have brought forward a motion to the board that will be heard on September 14th. And the motion essentially says that the board should look at this and decide if they should rule it inconsistent with the regional growth strategy. Now, having said all that, we have this funny situation out there that a number of years back, quite a few of the board members at the CRD, and I was not on the CRD board at the time, were frustrated with the process of governing this area. Under provincial legislation, the default is any development applications for the area would be heard by the whole CRD board. So at the day, I as a board member, if somebody in Shirley or Otter Point was asking for an extension on their garage, I as a CRD director from Saanich would be voting on whether they could have an extension for their garage. Well, if I'm going to do my job properly, I need to drive all the way out there and look at this garage and see how it affects the neighbors and all these kinds of things. Probably wasn't an appropriate way. So they applied to the province to have a different situation created where there would be a separate committee, in this case called Committee A, that would be made up of only 5 directors from the CRD, and they would vote on development applications for the area. The expectation was, I think, they would be fairly minor development applications. At the time, nobody even thought about the rural resource lands because they were essentially under provincial governance as part of the Forest Land Reserve and as part of a tree farm license. What happened when everything was released was now the question was, does this default for decisions back to the full board, or does it become something that is handled by Committee A?
Committee A is members from
the local area director for the Juan de Fuca area, and the directors from Machosen, Langford, Colwood, and Souk. Now, the idea was they would be somewhat proximate municipalities. Well, it's a huge area. In some cases, people in Saanich live closer to parts of the area than do people in Colwood. So there was no necessary rationale.
And certainly a lot of people from the core communities feel a real connection to what's happening out there now.
Well, absolutely.
And they want their CRD directors to be voting on it.
Well, they also see it as at least a regional asset the Juan de Fuca Marine Trail, if not a provincial and national asset. You know, it has huge tourist potential and is very attractive in that respect. But the question was, does it default to the full board, which I think it should have, or does it become part of what Committee A does? My view, it was never intended that Committee A would govern those lands. Nevertheless, the assumption seems to have been, and nobody has established otherwise, that Committee A would make the decision. And that's what's been happening up to now. I had real concerns about the regional impact, and so I brought forward the motion saying, let's rule on consistency. That is a full board decision. Now, then the rubber hits the road. On September 14th, I will ask the full board to vote on consistency. Let's say
consistency
with
meaning,
the regional growth strategy.
So what's happening out there has got to be consistent with the regional growth strategy.
Now, with the municipalities, and we've already talked about the issue of Central Saanich, the language about what a municipality can and can't do under the regional growth strategy is a little bit ambiguous in places, provincial legislation. With a region within its own area, and this is part of the regional governments, the Juan de Fuca lands, it is much, much more prescriptive. There is a part of the provincial legislation, the Local Government Act, that says very expressly, no region can pass a bylaw that is inconsistent with its own regional growth strategy. So if the board votes on September 14th that this is inconsistent, then there's a really interesting legal issue. When Committee A votes, it is acting as the board for that area. If the board has ruled it inconsistent, can Committee A approve it? I think not, because I think, you know, there's this very, very clearly expressed provincial legislation that says the board can't approve anything that's in violation with its own strategy.
So it sounds like Committee A wants to allow this development to take place, and the full board perhaps doesn't.
Committee A has voted on first and second reading and voted 4-1 in favor of it proceeding to a public hearing. Public hearing will take place on the 6th and 7th of September, and that's the opportunity for any member of the public to get out and voice their concerns, or their views one way or the other. And then it would probably come back to the CRD on September 14th, and they will have put together all the public input. And then there will be a vote on third reading. Now, only ones that get to vote on that are Committee A. I am allowed to speak as a director about any of my concerns, but I don't get to vote. But my motion also will come forward. Then finally, if Committee A decides they want to move it forward from third reading, then it has to go to the province to get provincial permission for final approval. So
what do you think is going to happen?
If I knew that, I probably could have told you a few months ago what the stock market would be doing. I just don't know, Jack. It really is a matter of how the board decides it will move procedurally. I will try to convince the board to say, my expectation, by the way, this will wind up in court, one way or the other. If the board may take the view of saying, we find this inconsistent, and we don't believe that Committee A can be permitted to pass this because the board has ruled it inconsistent.
Inconsistent
with the RGS.
Right, with the regional growth strategy.
If that was the case, then I guess Committee A could decide to sue the whole board, or the applicant or somebody else could sue. If it goes through, if let's say my motion fails and it goes through and it receives final approval, then it's quite possible the board could wind up suing itself, with the board going to court for the courts to tell the board whether or not this was appropriate. We also could be sued at the CRD by other groups who feel that we haven't done things right and haven't done our due diligence. So it's a mess. It should have never got to where it is. I don't think the process has worked properly. I suspect it may end up in court, and my view is that I think we're better off to do the right thing and see what happens from there. but it's up to the board.
So one can't say that CRD politics is boring.
No, I guess it's that old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. I think that sometimes applies.
And when you say go to court, that's not a bad conclusion either, because a court will give an outsider's view of what the law is. And
well, somewhat, except that consistency is supposed to be a political decision. It's supposed to be a decision from the local politicians who look at more than just the technicalities,
Yes.
look at things like the intent of the RGS. The courts have tended to look at things from a more technical point of view. I'm not sure you want that kind of issue decided that way.
We've been talking to Vic Derman, Saanich City Councillor. We've been talking, I guess, kind of about regional growth strategies and plans for our communities and the CRD as a whole. Vic, any last words?
Simply this, Jack, that if we don't have an agreement as to how we will move sustainably in the future, we all stand to lose a great deal. I believe municipalities should be able to, within that agreement, do whatever they want. And I'm a great supporter of the independence of municipalities in that respect. But we absolutely have to insist that when we finally work through and come to a conclusion as to how we will be sustainable in the future, that each one of us honors that agreement. Without that, we're lost. And by the way, if we can't make it work, then probably sometime in the future, some provincial government's going to step in and say, if you guys can't do it, we're going to amalgamate you.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Well, if they want to complain about people controlling their destiny, just force that to happen, and then you'll get it in spades.
Thank you, Vic Derman, and thank you for watching Face to Face.